Well, we welcome you today to the very first, and hopefully it's not the last, but certainly the first of many, I believe, writers' workshops. And it's called the Skilful Writers Workshop because we believe, as you'll find out from Kurt and others here, because this is a bit of a team effort, but Kurt's our shall we say, the main speaker. And the reason he's the main speaker is that he is leading on Sunday to finally go overseas as a missionary to Indonesia, and we're praying God's blessings upon him. So this is like a last opportunity to sort of get some of his wisdom and get some of his insight into writing. We're all on a journey, and all of us are writers in some way or another, communicators. And again, I want to welcome you here. And for those who will be listening afterwards, we're recording this for posterity. And for those who'd like to learn a little bit more, I just thought I'd just share some of my top three. I tried my top 3 points about writing, and they'll be very brief because, as I said, Kurt is the main man here. And just for the record, he makes me look good. So the book that we've written together, Great Southland Revival, he is the genius behind the book, and he makes me look good. You put my name in there, it helps my ego, but he does 95% of the writing. I sort of do a lot of production, and we talk about the ideas and the direction of the book. So it is a sort of a co-written book in that sense. But the true genius behind a lot of the books we've written together is Kurt's incredible, beautiful writing style. So I just want to put that up and make sure we all understand that it's not Warwick Marsh. It's definitely not Warwick Marsh. But I have learned a few things. My background is, very quickly, I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter, play guitar, and I've been writing songs for the last actually 50 plus years. And I love words. So I'm a wordsmith, because any poet slash songwriter has to understand words and the power of words and the rhyming of words, the meter of words. And I'm quite fascinated by words and how they work together and create pictures and tell stories. So, that's my background. About 21 years ago, we started Dads for Kids, and every week I write an article. It's somewhere between 600, 800 words to 1,000 words, and I add other words besides that. I've co-written now 4 books with Kurt. I've written hundreds of other articles, and I calculate over the last bit over 20 years that I've written 1.5 million words, and probably edited another million or so words, 2 million words on top of that. So what happens is you do get better. Practice makes perfect, and it's one of the keys to writing is to do a lot of writing. If you want to get good at writing, you have to do a lot of writing. So my top tips, when I started writing 20 years ago regularly, and it was quite a discipline to write every week, write an article every week for the last 21 years. One of my board members was the editor for Bicycle in Australia. His name is Phil Latz. I said, Phil, can you give me any advice as a novice writer? Yes, I've written lots of songs, I've written a few articles and done a few things, and et cetera, but I've never been a serious writer. Now, I'm tempting to be a serious writer. He said, what advice would you give me, Philip? And the one bit of advice to me that I can give you today is write short sentences. I'll say it one more time. Write short sentences. And so ever since then, I've wrestled with my words. When I see a long sentence, I try to cut it in half. If I see a long sentence, sometimes I'll cut it in 3. I don't always succeed. Sometimes I verge into long sentences. But I can tell you now that advice was absolutely transformative for me. And I would encourage you to live by that as a writer. Write short sentences, okay? Write short sentences. I think I've studied this, not massively, but I've looked at a lot of articles about writing short sentences. And the lady, I keep forgetting her name, that writes all those sort of ghost books and for kids and younger people. What's her name? Can anyone help me? Harry Potter series.
J.K. Rowling.
So J.K. Rowling, her average sentence is, from memory, 9, 10 words. Now, you try to write stuff for 9 and 10 words, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. But guess what? It grips you. It holds you, because just by doing that, you're simplifying your thought processes. You're making it very clear, and it actually helps you to write clearly and accurately and simply. So number one, write short sentences. Number two, write simply. Again, it's hard. I tend to veer into big words, and yes, I think it's not cool to use big words from time to time, and long, colourful adjectives and lots of that sort of stuff. But ultimately, simplicity is golden. The KISS formula works in life. The main thing is that it has, what's the line, Leonie? Can you help me, Leonie?
The plain thing is the main thing, and
the plain thing is the main thing, and the main thing is the plain thing. So simplicity is golden, and please keep it simple. And thirdly, tell stories. Use stories as much as you can. Weave stories into your writing. If you're trying to explain something, explain it in a story. If you've got a story, tell the story, and make as much as you do into stories, and use stories to tell your thoughts and give your ideas. Fourthly, I often use other people's quotes to get what I want to say across. So I encourage you to use other people's quotes to tell your opinion, your thoughts, because they're carrying the load, you're not. I'm not saying you shouldn't give your opinion, you shouldn't, put it out there, but I do think that quoting other people is very, 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 very powerful. And last but not least, I learnt this only a couple of years back. I saw this line: the art of writing is the art of rewriting. So, you can do that by having a good editor. And sometimes I'll give my own articles to Kurt, and he'll rewrite them and just touch them up and tweak them. But you can, then if you write something one day, come back to the next day and just, you can see it in the light of day. It'll get better, and you'll actually see the faults and see the gaps and see the things. And I encourage you to consider rewriting. But sometimes it's good to have a break, like work in a piece, work in an article, go away for 24 hours, come back the next day and think, oh my goodness me, the obvious. You can see the obvious. It's not there. Or, a key point isn't there. At this wonderful point, I'm going to hand over to Kurt. Kurt, can you give us some of your tips on how to be a great writer? Now, you've written 5 books. You've edited Dr. Jason Hubbard's book, and actually came up with a great title, I might add, Moravian Miracle. And you've written, I would imagine, getting close to 500,000 words yourself in articles and stuff as well. So thank you, and a big clap in a chair. Hip, hip, hooray. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Warwick. Great to be with you all. I thought I'll definitely get into tips, and a lot of what I'll cover, I'm sure will ring, there'll be some strong similarities with some of the things that Warwick has shared. But I thought I'd just step back a little bit and just look at the topic of writing more generally, because I'm very passionate about it as a medium. For those that are a bit aware of ancient history, the Roman roads, basically the Roman Empire set up this road system that made transport all across the empire possible. And that was, it was a real revolution, because up until that time, there were kingdoms very separate, geographically far apart. And so it was difficult for military to transverse those areas for trade, all that sort of stuff. But with the Roman Empire, came this amazing network of roads, which many of which actually have survived. They're incredibly well built. So even today, you can go to see examples of them. And they were all in place just in time for the coming of the Messiah. So when Jesus came and, lived, died, rose again, and then commissioned his disciples to take the gospel into all the nations, he did it at right at the right time, because the Roman road system was all in place. So it was a real miracle, a real, providence, in history, really quite amazing. And I believe we have a similar confluence of an opportunity in our time, which is the internet. Now, the internet's obviously probably close to 30 years old, something like that, maybe 40 years old at this point. So it's had some time to kind of grow and develop and change, and there's constant changes, but it is, relatively speaking, in terms of history, still a very new medium. And just as a bit of as an example, I have my own blog called Cross and Culture. I'll probably share a bit about that as we go. I don't post there quite as often as I used to, because so much of my content now goes straight to the Daily Declaration or straight to Mercatornet or various other publications. And so it's only when I republish now that I use it. But wind the clock back 2-3 years, and I was originally publishing all of my work there. And so I'd keep a bit of an eye on the metrics. And this one particular time, I took a look at it because I was running a workshop on writing at the time. And I looked how many nations of the world have seen my blog in the last year. And I was staggered because people from 132 countries had seen my blog in that year. It was probably tens of thousands of readers. So it's nothing, amazing in terms of coverage. But that diversity is incredible. So 132 countries, that's 2/3 of the world's population. So two-thirds of the countries of the world, rather, were represented in the readership of just my blog. And I say that not as some kind of brag, because like I say, the numbers weren't impressive of themselves, but the reach is amazing. The fact that we have this medium that can now go into the majority of the world's nations is just incredible. So I believe God has given us this window of time to take the gospel to the nations through the medium of writing, specifically through the internet. And the funny thing is, I've never really focused on other nations. I've just written content that I believe is relevant to Christians specifically, and I guess also to Westerners struggling with some of the crumbling remains of our civilization and the various struggles that we're going through. And yet people have shown interest. That particular year when I took that snapshot, 54 people from Nigeria read my blog that year. Well, that's crazy. I never wrote, with a market for Nigerians as my readership, and yet there they were reading. So all that to say, we do have this amazing opportunity to reach the nations with the gospel and with the good news and with good, godly, biblical worldview content. So I believe that now is a time for Christians to rise up and find their voice. So, and I thought I'd also give just a brief background of my own story of blogging, which might be a little helpful. So I began a blog when I was in ministry. I was a youth and young adults pastor in the Adelaide Hills. That was from about 2016 to 2019, no, 2014 to 2018, I think it was. Sorry, my figures are a little bit off there, but I was in ministry for 5 years, and I was very passionate about preaching. That was something I really loved doing week to week. And I started a blog because I thought, I've got some pretty good topics that I've preached on, which also lend themselves to written format. So I would repost essentially the manuscripts of my sermons, not every week, but just occasionally when I thought it, lent itself to that format. And I also had other topics I was really interested in, but there just wasn't space on the preaching schedule for those topics. So I just occasionally, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, I'd write just a short 600 to 800 word article about a topic I was passionate about, but that we weren't covering at church. So that's where it started. And as the same-sex marriage debate was happening, that was sort of right, that was happening right at the time I was in ministry, I started writing quite a few blogs on that particular topic. And I think that's probably where I started to hone my craft a bit more. I became a little bit more, I guess you'd say, skilled at writing short format articles that are easily digestible, easily shared on social media. And so that was a really great process for me, a good opportunity for me to develop some of those skills that Warwick was talking about earlier. And one article in particular went really viral. It was sort of shared, I don't know, must have been probably hundreds, maybe thousands of times. It had tens of thousands of views in the space of a couple of weeks. And that was where I really kind of realized, wow, a lot is possible in the sphere of writing. And I don't know that any of my articles that I've written since have ever had the same reach as that, to be honest. But I still remember that because, it just, the penny dropped and I realized the possibilities here and the capability of reach is just incredible. So like I said, we do live in this amazing period of history with so many opportunities for writers. Very exciting. In terms of what to, and sorry, I missed that. It was actually at the end of that debate, the same-sex marriage debate, And as I was wrapping up in ministry, that I actually bumped into Warwick at a conference. And this was in Adelaide. It was a conference that my friend Andrew invited me to. He introduced me to Warwick. They knew each other. And Warwick and I chatted for probably a couple of hours that day. And it was a couple of weeks later. He showed a lot of interest. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. Warwick showed a lot of interest in my passion for writing. We had a lot of shared interests in terms of Christian values. I'd been following the Canberra Declaration for a number of years. And Warwick had an interest in my blog, and I had a book idea I was sitting on, so I shared that with him. And I remember that conversation really well. And then a couple of weeks later, I bumped into Warwick at Awakening, this big revival event in Melbourne. I had lunch with him. It was great. And then it was a week later when Warwick called me up and said, "Kirk, one of our writers is not able to work for us anymore. Would you like to write for us?" And I just jumped on the opportunity. I never in a million years thought that writing could be a paid job. Like, I just had always enjoyed it as a hobby. But Warwick made that offer, and I never looked back. And here we are 4 years later, I reckon it is. And I've done more than writing with the Canberra Declaration, obviously, but I'd say writing has been probably about 80% of what I've done, and I've really loved it. And again, an amazing opportunity I didn't expect to come along. And for some of you, perhaps you've loved writing and never thought it would be possible to find a career in it, but maybe that is possible. Maybe you should consider that is a door God might open. So that's a bit of my own backstory, I suppose. In terms of a few tips, I guess when picking a topic to write about, that's probably a good starting point. I would say pick something that you're passionate about, something that you've already invested time into, something that you already have a good base or a good foundation of knowledge in, because that's all going to seep through whatever you write. The fact that you are passionate about it and you have a lot of base knowledge, that will be obvious in what you write. And we're talking specifically, I guess, about the Daily Declaration and the space of Christian news and Christian commentary. But even within that, you might think, okay, that's kind of narrow, like that's just a few little topics. But actually, it's not just a few topics. If you look at the Daily Declaration, the range of topics that we have published in articles on the Daily Declaration is actually incredibly broad. We've got book reviews and movie reviews. We've got devotionals. We've got current news items. We've got, I'm trying to think, Warwick, what are some other areas that we cover? There's biographies, there's testimonies, there's pieces of history, there's prophetic words about the future. There's just so many other current items. Obviously, things that the culture wars issues that are constantly raging. You could write on any of those topics, but it by no means narrow. Anything else you'd add to that, Warwick? In terms of the topics?
Think biblical. We talk a lot about this. We sort of see ourselves as really wanting to encourage people to go back to the Bible. So we're also writing, if you like, you've actually printed several of your sermons. I think they've been brilliant. And so, it's a very broad brush. Sometimes we think this is a narrow thing, but what we're trying to do is bring a Christian biblical worldview to the issues at hand and to the broad issues. Back to you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Fantastic. So even if you've got a topic like, it might be even something like photography or travel or cooking or some kind of craft or whatever, there's a biblical way to present that too, because if Christ is Lord of all, then he's Lord of baking, he's Lord of travel, he's Lord of everything. And so you can write the topic about in any of those areas. But if you think of how does my Christian faith relate to this? How does this relate to a biblical worldview? You could write a legitimately great article that could be published on the Daily Declaration on that topic. And I say that just to encourage you to think broadly, because there are so many opportunities. Don't think it's just Christian news or culture war issues. There's so much to be published on our site. Another one actually that came to mind is testimonies. So even just writing out your testimony or writing the testimony of someone who isn't actually a writer, but you interpret it and tell the story for them. I've called my blog Cross and Culture, and I called my first book Cross and Culture. Because for me, that's something I'm really passionate about. I am passionate about the cross, about the gospel, which is the good news of salvation that brings salvation for the whole world and is relevant, like I said, to all things because Christ is Lord of all. But I'm also really interested in culture, where our world is at the moment, where the nation of Australia is at the moment. and things intersect, I think is really fascinating. So for me, that's where most of my writing happens, at the intersection between the cross and the culture. And in saying that, I myself have blogged on things like missions. Warwick mentioned I'm about to head overseas, and I've done some previous mission work, so I'm passionate about that, and I've written on that topic. I've written on things like pornography, a really serious issue in our culture. I've written on the reliability of the Bible. I wrote on the topic of singleness. I was single for many years, 15 years before I was married. And so I've written quite a bit on that topic. I've written Bible commentaries. I've written on political topics. I've done a bit of writing on travel. So when I went to New York, I had some reflections I shared in a blog there. I've written book reviews. So in other words, even, I've talked about cross and culture being my thing, but, within that, there's just this huge range of topics that I've also written on. So just encouraging you to think broadly. Like Warwick said, writing is something that takes time to develop skills in. And I would say to find your voice, it actually does take time. It takes a lot of writing to actually get to a place where you're confident and you're like, yep, this is authentically me. It's like riding a bike. It's like anything, you'll do it the first time and the second time, and it'll be a longer, slower process, and you'll be a bit unsure of yourself. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you feel, and the more you'll actually find your voice. So there is no substitute for just doing a lot of it. It's just so important that if you're passionate about writing, that you just write, and keep writing. Now, I would say in the context of the topics that we write on and that the Daily Declaration is about, and in terms of a Christian worldview and biblical topics, I would encourage you to be buoyant, be as optimistic as you can be. It is easy to be quite pessimistic given the state that our world is in. And there's a lot of commentary that comes from a conservative point of view or a Christian values point of view that can easily be quite heavy and quite depressing and quite sad. And there's a lot of reasons to be depressed, of course, with, like I say, what is going on. And I have to say this to myself as much as to anyone, because, I tend to sometimes write articles or even end on conclusions that are a little bit like, okay, that's pessimistic. Like, what's the good news, And so that's one thing I always have to train myself to think, like, is there a redemptive aspect to this? Where does the gospel come into this? Prophetically, what is God saying in terms of taking the world to a better place than it currently is? So that's something I think as Christian writers we do need to always have front and center, because our witness is not just in the point that we're making, but also the attitude and the feeling and the sense that people have as they read our writing. Another tip I'd say in terms of, thinking about topics to write on is have some kind of a notepad or a notes file or an app where you can just, at the drop of a hat, write down an idea for a topic. I've done this for years. I've just got, I think mine's called Simple Note. Most phones have a native, note app. As soon as an idea comes to me for an article, I just write it down. And I'll often come back to that. And sometimes I might have had 3 or 4 different ideas come to me over a period of a few weeks. And I look at them all and I realize, oh, that's actually one article. They're my subpoints in an article and they come together nicely. In other cases, I might just jot an idea down and I might read an article a few weeks later. And then over time, again, this kind of idea from article comes together. But I think if I didn't write those ideas down at the time, I probably would have forgotten them. And then that possibility has passed. So I encourage you to just, as soon as inspiration comes to you, write it down and keep a bit of a notepad. I would also say that, similar to what Warwick was saying about, writing being a process and you have to work it and you have to, improve what you're doing, that sort of thing. I would say when it comes to my own writing, if you read just any one sentence that I've written, it's almost 100% certain that I didn't write that sentence as it currently reads now for the first time. That is probably the 3rd or the 4th or maybe the 5th iteration of that sentence, because what I've done is I've just put my ideas down. Doesn't have to be amazing first time around, but then I've sorted those ideas. I've put them into subheadings, and then I've read each sentence and made sure that it's short enough, it's clear enough. I've gotten rid of unnecessary words, unnecessary phrases. Then I've honed it again. I've probably deleted a bunch of sentences. So the final form of an article is actually nothing like the original one. And that's why I think the process of writing, and with the technology of keyboard now and word processing apps, it's so easy now to edit and to kind of rework what you've written. So I would just encourage you that when you do write, don't sit with a screen and a keyboard and think that whatever I write this sentence has to be, that's the end of the story, you know, then I write the next sentence. No, whatever you write, you can always come back and re-edit. And in fact, that's probably the best way to do it. That's certainly how I find is the easiest for me to do it. Now, in terms of, I guess, just some of the basics to writing, Warwick mentioned titles before, and he mentioned Moravian Miracle. We had a very long title for that book, or not very long, a fairly long title for that book, and I think it's the subtitle now. So the 100-year prayer meeting that changed the world, I think, was what we were going to call that book, and that's a pretty good title, not too bad, but it's pretty long as well, and it's not as memorable. And it also didn't mention the Moravians, and that book is all about. And I sort of sat on this for a while, and eventually I came up with Moravian Miracle. And then our subtitle became, you know, the 100-year prayer meeting that changed the world. And the title's just a lot more memorable. There's some alliteration there. You know, it's not the sort of title you're quickly going to forget. And what's true of a book title is also true of a blog title. I'm actually not that amazing at naming my blogs or my articles, and I appreciate it sometimes when Sam or Warwick or someone else jumps in and shortens it for me, makes it more catchy. But if you can think through your title in terms of it being shorter and catchier, you know, the shorter it is, generally, the better it is. And I guess we could, you know, open even the Daily Declaration right now and maybe look at some examples. But I would say that, yeah, it's really important to come up with a short, catchy, something? And memorable title. Yep.
Can I say something, Kurt? Look,
please.
Now you're mentioning titles. If I can say this, and look, I do believe if you can get a short title that's memorable, that's 100% correct. Having said that, when it comes to particularly blog and, you know, article titles, it doesn't hurt if they're, you know, longer. You know, you can have a longer title, but you've got to make that title as attractive as possible, and it's got to be sticky. It's got to be interesting. It's got to basically tell the very best side of your story and make people want to read it. If you don't have a good title, you can have a great article with a lousy title, and that article will never get read. But a good article, I should say, an average article with a really good title will always get read. Back to you.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I'd also say, Warwick hinted at this, come up with a title that actually tells the reader what's in your article. You don't have to give your punchline away or something like that, but you want the reader to know what it is they're about to read, because if they've got a pretty clear idea of that, then they're going to jump on board, assuming it's a topic they like. So, and it's funny, sometimes I'll sit down, I'll have a title for my article, I'll write the article, and that's great. Other times I'll sit down with a blank, you know, spot where that title is supposed to go, because I've got no idea what I want to call this, but I know what I want to say. I write the whole article, and then finally at the end, I'll put a title on, and often that might be a phrase that's kind of fallen out as I've written. So there's no particular order to it, but it is important to have a title that is catchy, that is memorable, or that is somehow poignant. It kind of tells the story of what you're trying to write there. And images, probably important to talk a little bit about images. If you're submitting an article to the Daily Declaration, you don't have to provide an image. That's something that we can do. But I would say it's a really good habit to get into, to think through what kind of an image would at least go well with your article. And if you can, as you're writing it, or once you've finished writing it, if you can find an image that you think would work really well with your article, then that's great. Because we are living in a visual culture, whether we like it or not. And the place that most people are going to be accessing your article from is probably social media or maybe email newsletter. And in both cases, there's going to be an image attached to that. That image essentially becomes the identity of your article that you've been working so hard on. So images are important. They are very powerful. I would say always choose an image that photographically looks good. Don't just, you know, if your topic is on, I don't know, let's say the land of Israel. If you've just got a landscape of Israel, but it's an average photo and it's just like a wheat field or something, it might mean something to you. Maybe you took it there on travel, but that's not going to catch someone if it's not amazing photography. It's got to be really good photography. And the same is true not just of a landscape, but of a person. You know, the article you write might be about something very personal and you've got a photo of someone's face. But if the photo is just an average, you know, it's not photographically very special, then it's not going to be a good photo to choose. You want to choose something that there's photographic skill that has gone into that photo. You also want to make sure the image is of a high quality. It needs to be, you know, like not pixelated. It needs to be big enough. Obviously, you need to make sure it relates to the content of your post. But I would also say it has to match the mood of your post. So, what a photo makes you feel has to be something similar to what the blog that you're writing makes you feel. It's not just about the topics lining up; it's about the mood lining up as well. If that makes sense, there's obviously a bit of intuition in that, and it's not a science; it's more of an art. But I would say that is quite important. And there are a lot of free sites that you can go to get photography you pay nothing for. Unsplash is the one we use the most. UNSPLASH. I can put that in the chat window. I've spent hours of my life, days of my life probably on Unsplash, and have found amazing photos on there for, you know, all sorts of articles that I've written and that other people have written. So, I mean, it's almost an endless library of free photos, which is pretty amazing. But Pixabay is another one. I can type that in there. And Pexels, I think it's called. So they're all really great resources for photos. So, you know, even if the photo that you choose isn't used in the end, even the process of scrolling through one of these sites and thinking through what kind of a photo do I need to line up with the topic of my post, that's a really good process for a writer to do in our visual sort of digital age, because it really does help you think about communication and your audience and empathizing with them and drawing them in. So that's a bit in terms of the images. In terms of length, Warwick's mentioned this already. I agree with Warwick that shorter is better. We tend to favor articles on our blog that are 600 to 800 words long. I think that is a fairly standard article length now for newspapers, for kind of popular level journals, for blogs, for news sites. That's a very common length. So I'd always be aiming for 600 to 800 words. There are, of course, exceptions to that rule, and that's fine. But if you're starting out, that's where you want to be aiming. When it comes to digitized text, so text on a screen as opposed to printed in a book or in a newspaper, paragraphs need to be short. Don't let your paragraphs run on for 4, 5, 6 sentences. Your paragraphs should be 1, 2, or 3 sentences long, no more. That's really important. Your sentences should be short. I don't think I achieve what J.K. Rowling does. My sentences are definitely longer than 10 words on average. I probably aim for 10 to 20 words, maybe 10 to 18 words. And I'd say there can be variety in that. 2-word or 3-word sentences are excellent because you're making some kind of a punchy point. So it is really good to have at least a couple of those in any article. But most of your sentences should be 10 to 18, 10 to 20 words long. And I'd say almost never longer than that. Very rarely should they be longer than that. Like Warwick, if I've kept my blogs short, if I've kept my paragraphs short, and if I've kept my sentences short, I feel like I've succeeded in the writing of an article. So yeah, I can't stress more how important brevity is. It's really important. Yeah. And the reason I think it is important is because you're basically condensing down a complex topic into something that's much more bite-sized and much more digestible and much clearer. That's why, like, shortness for shortness' sake it's not what you're going for. Shortness for clarity's sake. That's the purpose of being short. That's the purpose of being brief, is to be clear, so that your points come across simply and powerfully. A quick word about links. So when you're blogging, when you're writing an article for, say, the Daily Declaration, always try to include at least a couple of links to other good quality websites. That might be to a mainstream media outlet. It might be to a Twitter post that someone's made. It could be to, obviously it's got to be relevant, but the key point is make sure that it's going to a reputable website, because that actually helps drive traffic back to this article that you're writing, if it's linked to reputable sources. It also makes your article more visible to search engines, because it sees that you've linked to ABC website or something like that, because it already gives credibility to those websites. And try to link back to Daily Declaration articles if you're writing for the Daily Declaration. We do that anyway, but it's good practice, because that actually helps the blog itself. It helps build our SEO and build our traffic when you link back to that site. And the same is true if you've got your own blog, then link back to your own blog to previous articles that you've written. That's an important practice to do. And then I guess I've got a little bit here on just growing your reach. I guess this isn't something I've worked on too much over the last couple of years, but there is a lot to be said for, if you're wanting to get your name out there, if you're wanting your writing to be read by more people, there is a lot of stuff you can do to actually grow your reach, to increase the number of people who are reading your articles. There's probably excellent resources out there on YouTube, and you can just Google articles on this topic. But there's a lot of things that you can do to help build your reach, basically reach more and more people. One of those, of course, is having social media accounts and staying very active on them. The basics, I suppose, are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They're probably the main ones still. But there's every month there's a new social media platform out there, and if you can, every year add one more platform to your to your collection and stay active on each of them. Obviously, this is if you're trying to really drive traffic to your site, or to the articles that you've submitted to other sites like the Daily Declaration. I'd also say on those channels, on your social media platforms, don't be afraid to share old articles that you've written a few months ago or even a couple of years ago, because I've done that there's a couple articles I've written that I love and I keep coming back to, because I think they've got a value that outlasts the time they were written in. And when I've reposted them, a lot of people have actually clicked and gone and visited them, and then connected to my website. So always worth considering doing that. I'd say post regularly as well. If you've got your own blog, I would post probably 1 to 3 times a month is good practice. If you can do it once a day, that's amazing. That's probably what the professional level people do. But even, just 1 to 3 times a month is a good place to start. And then when it comes to social media, if you're really trying to kind of tailor your social media feeds to your writing, I would say post one, maybe 3 times a week, something like that. So it might be posting the same article 2 times and posting an old one as well, that sort of thing. And also posting other content that relates, to the topics you're interested in. And it's always good to have a place to onboard people to subscribe to your blog. So if you're on Substack or WordPress, have it set up so that people can easily jump on board and get your newsletter. And we've obviously been trying to work at that with the Daily Declaration as well, building our email list and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think that's probably most of the stuff I was hoping to share. Warwick, is there anything that you feel like I've missed, or any other specific questions you'd like to ask me about any of those topics or anything else?
I think it's fantastic. Is there any questions people would like to share questions, and you might have comments even? I'll just make one comment about Kurt's. He talks about not being depressing. Unfortunately, the reality of so much of what we do, we're fighting these gargantuan forces, and the horrible reality is we keep losing, and that's why we're praying. We have to pray to see a change. We need a miracle, and that's why we are praying so much and fasting and just crying out to God. But it is important to be positive amidst the negativity. And what Kurt does with his writing, he's got a beautiful light touch, and it's not condemnatory either. That's the other problem, is we can become, when you're always blowing the trumpet, sounding the alarm in Zion, as it says in the scripture, as Kurt said, it can become quite depressing. So because we don't seem to make it headway. We seem to be losing more battles than we win. And that's actually the truth, sadly, at the moment anyway. We're believing for a turnaround, but we also have to admit the truth and where we are in our culture and the fight. And but Kurt somehow always has this redemptive theme. He has this ability to have a light touch, not a heavy touch. I tend towards, becoming a little bit depressive myself in my writing and becoming heavy. And I just appreciate your touch, Kurt, to write in a light way that's always encouraging, even in a very dark article, a very dark truth you're bringing out. But anyone got any comments or questions about writing they'd like to ask Kurt?
I'll chuck in a comment. Thanks very much, both of you, for putting this on. Fantastic. Just on the technology front, if you're not a technical person, get help. Yep. Talk to people who know what they're doing. For a whole bunch of reasons that I won't go into because I had to go through this exercise recently, there are different offerings out there for people publishing. Substack's okay. If you're looking at building your own site, as in a blog site, there are fundamentally a couple of options nowadays. There's one called Wix. Wix is easier to get started with, but locks you in. The other one's WordPress. WordPress takes more effort to get going, but you actually have a much better run in the long run. And my background's business and IT, as most of you know. So bottom line, I'm saying I highly recommend that if you're going to dive in the deep end and have a website and a blog, use WordPress. And there's a lot of skills out there, and someone can set that up for you very cheaply. You can have your own hosted website for around, will be less than 130-ish Aussie a year, that sort of mark, which will handle most people's initial setup. So that's like, what are we saying, about, $10, $11, $12 a month. So I just mentioned that because that's something people that want to publish, there's a mind what they're doing on the technical front, get some good advice, and Canberra Declaration that we work with, we're all on WordPress, so just letting you know.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems that I have is procrastination. What are your strategies for overcoming procrastination? I mean, you can justify anything procrastinating. You can read articles, it looks very virtuous, research, interview people, but at some point you've got to put your bottom in the chair and actually write the thing. So yeah, what are your tips for that?
Oh yeah, that's a hard one. I feel the same way. I'll often read more on a topic than I probably need to before I sit down to write it. And part of it is because I'm really interested in that topic, but part of it also is procrastination. Like, it takes effort to read, but it takes a lot more effort to write. So of course, I put that off and I put that off. I mean, for me, I guess it helps that it's now a paid job, so I can't procrastinate forever. I have to actually produce something. So maybe for me, that's become my main strategy. It's like, well, Kurt, you're not going to get paid there to just read. You actually write. So maybe that's part of it for me. But I'd probably also say that, there is a lot of satisfaction in completing an article. And actually I've often described it, particularly when you're talking about something the size of a book, as opposed to just an article, but it can be a big article too. It almost feels like, not that I'm a male, so I've got no idea what this is like, but the process of giving birth, it's like there's something in me and it has to get out. And if I just keep reading, I've
often described writing an article as giving birth. So you're right on the money.
Yeah, so it's confirmed by a woman. That's great. But yeah, I often feel very frustrated until this idea has come out of me and has come out of me in a form that other people can understand it and digest it. So, and there is a payoff. Once you've done it, there's the satisfaction of being able to share that and then hear people's feedback and know that it's having an impact and making a difference. So yeah, I guess that's probably they're the two things for me, just sitting down and doing it, and also knowing that when I've completed it, there's actually a payoff. So I guess that's how I motivate myself if I'm struggling. But actually, why don't we open that up? What do other people do? How do you overcome procrastination when it comes to writing?
Has anyone else got some great wisdom to share with us? Millie? Anyone else?
I do keep a little quote from Anne Lamott above my desk, which says, don't be afraid of the shitty first draft. Sorry for the language, but it just reminds me that sometimes, because you're trying to get it perfect in your mind and it'll never get perfect in your mind, and often it's fear that stops me from writing, I think, in a way. So but once you start the writing process, and as you said, Kurt, often you've rewritten a sentence sort of 3 times. It's the crafting that comes later. So that's she put in much more succinct words what I was trying to say earlier. So there you go. But I totally agree. And one thing I didn't say that I would add is that it is much, for me at least, it's much easier to edit an already written sentence than it is to write a sentence. And so when it comes to writing that first sentence, just grit your teeth, clench your fists and do it. And then it becomes easier to come back and edit it later on. So you just got to do it. Nike, just do it,
Yeah, just say a couple of things on that. Number one, you have to start. Starting is the hardest thing. So once you start that first sentence, that's probably the hardest thing. So start writing process, number one. Number two, I often think about the title. So I often have what I call a working title, because the titles are so critical. So I put what I call a working title up there, then start. I think it's very handy to actually have a working title to do something, so you're hanging something on something. But as you go through, you think, wait a second, this changes. Sometimes, I don't know how you guys find it, but someone's going to write an article, it actually changes as I write it. And so I think, wait a second, I could probably use this title, and then I'll adjust the actual article to fit the title, the new title, and do it that way. But yes, starting is hard. I think you've got to sort of, there's 2 aspects of this. It's the creative process, but it's also work and creative process. Same with songwriting. Oftentimes songs come very quickly. I've written some songs I've written in half an hour, 15 minutes. It's just like the words come to you, and chorus and the bridge, and it all just comes together. But in most cases, I've worked at those songs, in some cases many years, with these disparate ideas. I love what you say, Kurt, about getting ideas down and writing them down while you have them. And a lot of musicians do this with songs, that they record their song ideas immediately. And I would encourage you, if you've got an idea for an article, to write those little ideas down. And then, as you said, you look back at it, you think, well, that's actually 3 ideas, but actually they're one article. And so you can actually you're working your creativity. Any other comments about procrastination? Or any other questions or comments? Okay.
I have a question. Even the thought of having a blog and anybody be interested to hear what you have to say it's rather huge, Kurt, really. But not only that, I'm wondering from a legal point of view, and I mean not legalistic as in legal, do we hang ourselves out to dry to say when we say stuff that might not be particularly popular with the culture we're living in? Is there a thing where we might get ourselves into strife?
Yeah, great questions. First of all, on the whole, putting yourself out there through a blog, I would say don't start out. If you're wanting to start a blog to hone your writing skills, I wouldn't start out with the intention of it being read widely. Like, yes, aim for that down the track, but think of it in the short term as a place for you to hone your craft. Your home studio. If you're a musician, your home studio. Because unless someone's got the link or is aware of it, they're not going to be reading it anyway. So you can put it out there, and have that sort of sense of euphoria of maybe someone will read it, and maybe someone important will read it, and someone will share it. But without, while knowing that it's not necessarily going to be splashed across, everywhere, everyone's social media feeds or whatever. But I think there's value in having a blog or a website, even if you don't have a big readership, because it sets that discipline in place, and it gives you an opportunity to hone your craft and that sort of thing. In terms of the legal side of things, I think that's pretty career specific. So my brother-in-law is a doctor, a GP. Actually, he's an anaesthetist. And during COVID, he was opposed to a lot of the things that were done from both a sort of spiritual, ethical point of view and also from a medical point of view. But he had to be very circumspect in what he said on social media, because it would have really affected his career if he'd, said more than he did, or said what he really thought. And that the same is true for various careers. I think the medical industry is particularly difficult at the moment, but there's probably a lot of other careers you could think of. But having said that, I guess like a teacher maybe as well. But having said that, I think I don't know. People post stuff on Facebook all the time anyway, and there's repercussions for that occasionally. So if you're willing to post it on Facebook, then it's fine to put in long form on WordPress on your website. It's just going to be it's just going to be a case by case or a career by career scenario. And let's say you might think, well, 10 years down the track, I might be going for some really important like CEO role or something like that. Well, I guess you could always, just delete everything, clear your history, scrap it all before you sit for that interview or whatever it might be. There's ways around that. Nothing, once it's on the internet, it's kind of there forever, but there are ways to make it quite invisible, where you need to. So, I guess that's my thought. Again, maybe I'll open it up if other people have. Maybe Kim, you've probably got a bit more experience or some more thoughts in this area, your background.
Yeah, oh dear Lord, there's an intellectual property side of law, which is with copyright and things like that. So you've got to make sure you attribute and quote, and do those sort of things. The other half comes under libel and defamation. If you're going to talk about someone that's been charged with a crime, chuck the word alleged in. Don't ever say they did X. It was alleged they did X. Look, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but make sure you stick to real basics like that. If you're going to say something as an opinion, make sure it's an opinion. Don't try and state something as fact that is simply an opinion, because they can hang you out to dry on that. What else would I say right up the front? And really be careful in criticising people. Don't do it. You can, and in fact, never criticise a person. You can criticise an idea or a philosophy and go after factual errors, but never say, Warwick said X and I don't agree with X is okay. You can't say Warwick is a Wally. That's the difference. So if Warwick said X and you disagree with X, that's okay, because then you're debating the issue of whatever, whatever the thing is. But if you you never disparage someone personally. So there are real basic things that you can do legally. There are legal reference places for writers on those sort of issues. So just Google that as well. And I've run into it in business over, there's been some issues where things were said in emails and someone got sacked, and it comes up not just in writing but just in business in general. So, and I have had the joy of having to deal with some of the fallout from that. So, but if you stick to the basics of, if someone's accused of something, it is alleged they did X, that sort of covers you to a large extent. Deal with the issue and not the person, okay? And never, they're the real basic things you can do. And just watch out. You can quote stuff up to, the rules around copyright and what's called fair use are very clear. Have a read of the Copyright Act here in Australia. That's quite readable. There are guidelines for both images and writing and what you can and can't copy, borrow, and make sure you attribute when you do borrow it. Most Bible, you can quote most versions of the Bible with giving the right attribution, things like that. So,
So that's great, Tim.
Keep it simple. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'll just add to what Kim said around, play the ball, not the man. That's my way of phrasing it. But you can address an issue very clearly and with a lot of conviction and a lot of clarity, without necessarily attacking an individual. if you know Lyle Shelton, he's a great guy. We've got a fantastic relationship with him. He's very encouraging. He just stood for Parliament in New South Wales. We have him on prayer calls. We've got a close relationship. He's found himself in some hot water because I think there's a couple of drag queens that have taken him to some kind of a Queensland tribunal, I think, over stuff he wrote about them. And I don't, that's it's totally fine that Lyle wrote what he wrote, and he feels very convicted to have written that, and good on him, and I really hope he does well in those cases and stuff. But I guess my style of writing is such that I just don't, I never play the man. Like I never, or very rarely do I sort of personally criticize someone, or if I do, I'm quite careful in how I go about that, because that is the place where you potentially find yourself in legal trouble, because you've personally addressed someone and offended them, and then they're personally going to take legal action against you. Over the last few years, written more than Lyle has, and on the same kinds of topics, but I haven't ever found myself or even worried that I'd find myself in legal trouble, because I tend to play the issue rather than the person, if that makes sense. So,
although we go back to Lyle had a much higher profile because he was the ACL when it goes back to when I think he was the head of the ACL, and he has a much bigger public profile. And he had said that it was inappropriate for trans to do story reading, and the things that he said were actually, he was arguing the issue, and that's going to be, and I know it is his defence.
Right.
So he never said anything against any particular people, but they, under the discrimination, have taken offence at what he wrote.
Right, okay.
And they're trying to use the discrimination laws. Oh, this guy said something not nice generically on an issue that we find offensive. And, of course, Lyle's counter, well, I find your actions offensive of what's going on. So it's going to set a very interesting legal precedent, and they sort of pushed it through the arbitration, which didn't go anywhere. It'll end up in court. If common sense goes through, then Lyle will be all right. If they go left-wing on the discrimination, and offence is something you can be charged with because someone else got upset about something you wrote about an issue, then we're all in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perhaps I chose a bad example there, or maybe it's that, things actually are increasingly becoming difficult. So where it used to be true that if you'd play the ball and not the man, you'll be safe, and maybe that's starting to change. So, I don't know. I guess maybe I need to continue thinking carefully about the sorts of even the sorts of issues I write on. But I'd say I think Lyle's profile played into that a lot. So if you're starting out, you're fairly small and not particularly well known, there's a fair bit of scope of what you can say before you've ever found yourself in any sort of legal trouble. So,
thank you.
Yep.
Great question. Really
Nicole,
very good question.
Nicole, have you got any questions? Yana, Rosalind?
Not really. That was really helpful, though. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. That was really helpful as well.
Yeah, no worries. You're welcome.
Last call for questions, comments as we finish.
I'll chuck one in. If someone wanted to do a very short crash course on blog writing, article writing, I assume that's something that you never did because you kind of didn't need to. You already were in a church. You were learning speaking skills. You were learning writing skills as you went along. But and maybe that's something that I can look into as well, is just what is out there as far as a short writer's course or tutorial, that kind of a thing. Do you know of anything that is out there that's easily accessible that would be useful?
Great question, and the answer really is no. I like you say, I probably learnt what I know just through doing, and I haven't ever really looked at resources. But I mean, in life in general, if I need to be stepped through a process of anything, installing a program, fixing a issue around the house, I just get on YouTube, because I feel like there's so many YouTube videos out there now that will teach you anything and everything. So I would say YouTube probably is a great resource. So if you were to ask a broad question about, top tips for blogging or something, you'd find good content. But if you thought of a specific issue when it comes to writing, like choosing a good title or shortening my sentences, use specific search terms like that in terms of writing or blogging on YouTube, and you'd probably find plenty of content on that sort of stuff as well. I think there'd be a lot out there that you could get for free. Don't even have to pay for that sort of stuff. That would be my guess. So, yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much. I think we'll finish it there. I really do appreciate you coming along. Thank you for sharing, Kurt. Anyone would like to thank this man for his encouraging words? Just say something nice to him, because he's just about to go overseas. And you might get another chance for quite some time.
Well, thank you, Kurt, for all the writing that you've done, because I've been following your work closely, and also just for giving some of your precious time at what I'm sure is a very busy time leading up to going away. So thank you for the gift of that. I'm sure we will use what we've gleaned wisely, and blessings for the few weeks and days ahead.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks heaps, Kurt. You have inspired some young people over here in Moree when you came over to speak, and really, really appreciate the work you do. And yeah, it's great. All the best.
Thanks, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
I've said it before, mate, that you've been such a great help. You and Warwick both have taken me through the baby steps and put up with my musical lyricist way of writing and refined it, and as Warwick said, often taking the rap artist in me that I didn't know existed and made common sense out of it. So God bless you, mate. You know, we love you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time, brother, and we're eagerly waiting to join you on your journey with beautiful energy and what you're doing in the future. So God bless
you. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. You guys likewise are huge encouragement to us. Appreciate it.
Yes, so look, thank you so much, Leonie, Kim, Julie, Yana, Nicole, Rosalind, and Diane and Millie. And we've had one or two people who've come and gone. For those who are listening to the recording, we hope you enjoyed it. And yes, I think we'll put our heads together and try to find some great articles on YouTube about writing. And we do have some good links we can send out as well. So thank you, and God bless you. It's just great to be with you all. And I'm going to stop the recording now.